First, just permit me to salute Drs. James and Larissa Grunig for a lifetime of contributions to the study and advancement of public relations. In particular, identifying the four models of public relations that many of us debate even today: press agentry, public information, two-way symmetrical communications, and one-way asymmetrical communications. Now, I don't pretend to lecture this expert Grunig audience on the differences, except to note two things. First, symmetrical communications puts ethics at the heart of the process, whereas asymmetrical communications, that is to say, persuasive communications that serve to advocate, may not, and I repeat, may not, have ethics in its process or as its outcomes. And I dare say that today, more than ever, asymmetrical warfare is the rule and not the exception. That makes our need to raise the discussion level on ethics to a much higher level. Even in the four-model approach, the Grunigs have not let us go without ethical guidance. But is the concept of ethical behavior a concrete notion subject to or a notion subject to interpretation? Maybe it's just dependent on the situation, or maybe, as the Godfather once famously said, it's business, it's not personal. But Godfather, does that make it okay? I don't know. I guess one reason I'm here is because of the work we have done at FleishmanHillard and the Council of Public Relations Firms to rejuvenate the industry's commitment to ethical behavior. That resulted in the development and launch of the initiative Frank described called Ethics as Culture. There were two rival technology companies battling for the same space. Technology company A began a smear campaign against technology company B, and did so anonymously, and used an agency to do the campaign. The people on the agency side who perpetrated this smear, and who were ultimately discovered, were recent immigrants into public relations. They were two very senior people from the news media industry. They had only been in public relations a few months. Think of that. Senior personnel from the news industry come into the public relations industry, and this is what's disturbing, is that they came in, and this is what, I got a good sound effect here. This is what's disturbing. They came into the industry with the predisposition that public relations was all about dirty tricks, that it was okay to smear your competition and do so anonymously. I know PR has a profound history. Public relations plays a noble role in society. Public relations has principles. And if this proves anything, it proves you cannot get into public relations simply by changing your address. You've got to put in the time to learn about the role of public relations and what properly drives it. Question. Is it possible that the concept of right and wrong differ that much by culture? Is it possible? Actually, the definition of good and evil, right and wrong, are pretty consistent across the world. I asked one of my researchers to see how many religions have a version of the Ten Commandments. Here's the partial list, and all of them say, do not be dishonest, and all of them say, do not steal. And organized religions, by the way, cover about 90% of the world population. The point is that notions of right and wrong are indeed universally held beliefs. This means we are not dependent on instinct alone. We have, in fact, a civil code of conduct that has been formed over the centuries. And if virtuous behavior was instinctive to mankind, we would not need such conventions. And there is a key point there. It is true we cannot possibly create enough rules to cover the infinite variety of choices we encounter, but we can create a set of principles that reasonable people can apply. Anything less has us playing at the lowest common denominator of behavior and judgment. And we need the guidance. We need to actively, we need to willfully, and we need to forcefully apply these principles, or we will surely, slowly, and inevitably erode our own moral base. Are we in a Godfather world where we can conveniently compartmentalize behaviors because they are customary or expected, or because business has become off limits to morality and ethical decision-making? So what's gone wrong? Why has corruption become so prevalent? It's clear that when you have a concentration of power in any one place and a lack of transparency, you have a breeding ground for corruption. But I ask you, is that any reason to give up? Of course not. Worldwide, all of this is changing. Democratic principles, i.e. principles of fairness, are being embraced, and transparency is the driving force. Morality may not move you, and if it doesn't move you, how about practicality? How about a sense of survival? How do you feel about massive fines or jail time? Or how do you feel about being barred from business altogether? Corruption is not a sustainable model, and that it leads to distrust, anger, and unrest. It undermines the rule of law, so why obey any law? Moreover, many of the corners cut by corruption end up hurting the public. Food products that poison you, harm you, or kill you. Hard goods that are unreliable, they break down. Business opportunities that favor only those who can pay. Medicines that don't work and streets that don't get paved. So what is the point? The point is that being in public relations is not a spectator sport. We in our industry believe in the nobility of service, but it's time we stood for something more. It's time for public relations to lead. But let's get back to a fundamental rule today. It's almost as irrefutable as a law of nature. No company can exist without the permission of its publics. If you lose the permission of your publics, you will lose your privilege to operate. And all of this is linked to the actual behaviors of your company. The ethical and, yes, even moral tone of any company is expressed in the day-to-day behaviors of its employees, constructively. The need for change has never been more urgent or more obvious. More companies today are being forced into accountability across a wider range of audiences. This brings us to the seminal question: whose job is it to protect a company's permission to operate? Let me save you some time. It's our job. If it's not our job, then whose job is it? We are the moral conscience of our organizations. It's our obligation and duty to speak up. So how do we go about this? Not brand management, character management. This is a great quote from Abraham Lincoln. Character is like a tree, and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing. Character management will become a business strategy. And this addresses a very simple truth which we touched on earlier. Unethical behaviors do not build a sustainable business model. Unethical behaviors create enemies. They risk the ire of lawmakers and regulators, and they disenfranchise the public. In short, unethical behaviors may work in the near term, but they are not sustainable over the long term, as we demonstrated earlier in these remarks. If we get character management right, we will save organizational jobs, we will save money, we will protect and drive value, we will open and preserve markets, and otherwise protect our organization's permission to operate. The question public relations people should ask themselves every day is, am I protecting my company's permission to operate? Do I feel what I and my company are doing is ethically correct? If the answers to these questions is anything short of yes, then you need to engage. You need to engage. Only by engaging management will you either change the organization or satisfy yourself that your company is making good choices. Do everything you can to create a culture of ethical decision-making. That means when there isn't a directive to refer to, their correct behaviors are almost atmospheric. Everyone knows what the organization stands for. The cues are there, the principles are known. The reinforcement and disincentives are unspoken, but well understood. We at FleishmanHillard and the Council of Public Relations Firms are trying to do the same thing for our industry. We are trying to put tools and methods in the hands of our agency and the council membership to enable both to create a living, breathing culture of ethical decision-making. That, of course, is where ethics as culture comes in. Now, I want to make this clear, that ethics as culture goes way beyond training, way beyond training. It examines every aspect of how we behave or how we do things around here. All of our policies and procedures tend to drive one behavior or another, some intended, some unintended. So everything goes under the microscope. Now, before I take questions, I want to leave you with yet another quote that I have used many times. It's from the great philosopher Aristotle, and it contains inherently good advice. He said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit." As public relations practitioners, we can help our organizations form a habit of excellence in the area of ethical decision-making. This takes courage. This takes conviction. Tonight, I hope I provided just a small amount of both. Thank you very much.